I've known Christine when she first started out in the South Suburbs, introduced to her by the late and my all-time dear friend Aldo DeAngelis. I've watched her grow. She's now the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. And as a 23-year South Suburbanite, I want you to know I'm really proud that they're happy to introduce the Senate Republican leader, Christine Radogno.
Well, thank you. Well, I am glad that Paul introduced my colleagues, but there are a few people that I was a little surprised to see here today and very grateful that they are here, including former Senate President Emil Jones. So it's very nice to see him. Now, Senator Berman is a somewhat regular. You've been here before, but Dan Hines, it's nice to see you as well. So I hate to go down the road of recognizing people because you will always leave someone out, but this is always a great group to come and talk to, Republican and Democrat, because it's a well-informed group. And if I think there's any problem that we have today in the state, the one thing that could solve it is a better educated electorate. So I appreciate your interest in what's going on in the state. Every year when I come here, I think about, well, what should I talk about? What would be timely? What would be interesting? And usually I end up doing an update. What's going on in the state? What is the state of the state? But as I thought about it this year, I felt like I would be giving last year's speech if I did that, because not a lot has changed. I mean, the state, quite frankly, is still a fiscal basket case. I don't know if that's a technical term, but I think that we would all agree with that. We still have $8 billion in unpaid bills. We have $100 billion in pension debt. We're on a path that will not let the temporary income tax sunset as it had been promised. But we know all of that. So I tried to think hard, is there anything good happening in the state? And there are a couple of things, so I thought I'd spend a little bit of time on those, and then talk a little bit more about the issue that is really overhanging everything, and that is pensions, and my particular interest in one area there. But one thing that I think that we have had some success in, bipartisan success, is Medicaid reform. I do want to take a little bit of credit for that. Back in 2003, we set up a bipartisan, bicameral committee to look at Medicaid. We saw then that this was a program that was threatening to crowd out everything, much like we see with pensions today. It took a long time, but finally last year we did pass some pretty significant Medicaid reforms. And again, I'm pretty pleased to be at the forefront of that. And remember, the point in reforming Medicaid is to make sure that the safety net is there for the people that truly need it. That has to always underlie our thinking. We're particularly challenged right now, though, because we're looking at adding another 250,000 people to the roll. So even with the reforms that we've put into place, it will be a challenge. Now, some of those reforms you may recall included prescription limits, usage limits, ending the ability to push off Medicaid bills, which the state used to bill the following fiscal year for services incurred in a current year. And doing that time after time after time, it allowed the state to run up a significant amount of debt, and we were able to end that practice, which was a significant step, hopefully that will help us avoid getting into that problem again. We looked at other states and some of their best practices, so everything about the Medicaid reform, I think, was well done, bipartisan. It did pass, and now we're to the stage of implementation. So we're not finished yet, but it is very interesting as we begin, albeit slowly, to implement those changes. One of the first things that we have found, we hired an independent contractor to review the Medicaid records with respect to eligibility. And what they recommended with the first round that they reviewed is that 2/3 of the Medicaid beneficiaries on those rolls were ineligible. Now, we have a long way to go. There's 1 million records to review, but so far 19,000 of the 29,000 have been found either to make too much money, to live outside of Illinois, or they're dead. So, you know, I think that that's a reminder to all of us when we say there's nothing more we can do, we're tightened to the bone. That's not true. We can always, always, always do better, and I think this is a prime example. So we need to continue to be vigilant with those programs. Now, Julie Hamos, the department director, who's done a good job, I think, of implementing these things, although we wish she were going a bit faster, called that the low-hanging fruit, but I'd like to call it progress. I think we need to take that claim of progress wherever we can. Now, believe it or not, I also think we have made some progress on pension reform. And you may say, what do you mean? But I think that there is a measurable difference today in the understanding and the resolve to do something about pensions than there was, say, a year ago, or more certainly 5 or 10 years ago. Now, you can't solve a problem if nobody understands what you're talking about, or if they think that there really is no problem. We've said this before, and it will get better. So we've won the battle of acknowledging the problem. Now, of course, the difficulty is to finish that war and figure out what we're going to do about it. We have some challenges with that regard. Illinois, of course, has some of the strongest pension protection language of any state in the United States, which makes it very difficult for us to reform things. As you may be aware, there have been, to date, essentially 2 schools of thought on pension reform. One, I would say, is a more house-oriented thought, and that is the one where you can actually remove benefits or roll them back using sort of the theory that the state has police powers in a fiscal crisis, and that the consideration for the person that has that contractual relationship is the fact that their pension will continue as opposed to completely go away. That, again, is sort of the House framework. On the Senate side, the Senate president has been very tied to the offer and consideration model, and you may know that what he has proposed is that he would allow people to make a choice between their access to health care and continuing their COLAs, as well as continuing to be able to increase their pensionable salary. So his theory is that put both out there and let the Supreme Court decide. Now, I do understand he's been meeting with the union, so perhaps there's some movement that we'll find out when we get back down there. But again, the good news is there's a lot of good work being done on this issue. I will tell you that Republicans have been very, very committed to putting votes on something that will help solve the problem. We not only have in the Senate voted for both the Senate President's proposal, the House version of it. We have a number of members who have introduced their own versions of it. So there's a lot of good activity, and we have roll calls to demonstrate our strong, strong commitment to pension reform. So we'll be looking at what comes out in the next few weeks. The only thing I hope we don't do, or I hope doesn't occur, is that the only thing put up on the board to vote on is something so minimal that we really can't say that it's even taken a step towards solving the problem. Quite honestly, solving this problem in one fell swoop is probably not possible. Making incremental progress, stabilizing the system, showing the rest of the world that Illinois can actually do some responsible major things, all that is possible. Solving in one fell swoop is probably not, but we certainly will be voting for something that moves us in that direction. One thing that's come up along the way, though, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, is that of all the concepts that are out there, one has come up that has been very, very controversial, and that is the cost shift. Now, you may recall that the speaker said that the suburbs and downstate are getting a free lunch because the state pays for the pension costs of suburban and downstate teachers, while Chicago pays for the cost of their own teacher pension system. I was a little surprised at the tone of that language, because when you're dealing with something very controversial, that doesn't necessarily help things along the way. But I think it really rankled people, because intuitively, downstaters and suburbanites said, wait a minute, that just doesn't sound right that we're getting some sort of a free lunch. So what our caucus did, with a great deal of help from the State Board of Education, and of course our staff is terrific, they really dug into that concept. And what we found out is that, in fact, it's far, far from the truth that the suburbs and downstate are getting a free lunch with respect to school funding. And that the pension proposal, probably the cost shift is best separated from the discussion of benefit reform. Not that we shouldn't have that discussion, and for that I'm grateful that the speaker raised the issue, but it is extraordinarily complicated. And what I want to do is to demonstrate to you a little bit of what we found today, particularly because this audience, frankly, is heavily Chicago, and I'm looking forward to this being a true policy discussion going forward as to what we can do about what's happened with school funding. So, as I said, what we found is that what we intuitively knew is in fact true, that Chicago is getting quite a bit of money from the school funding formula. And it's important to note that our school funding formula, and obviously you were a huge education funding person, I think that's your claim to fame. As you know, it's been a while since we did it. It's been a while since you've been there. We probably could use you back to take another look. But a lot of those formulas really haven't been looked at since the 90s. And so now here we are coming up on 20 years, and I think it's high time that we have another serious discussion about school funding and also school achievement. But those things, again, need to be separate from the pension discussion. The other thing we found, in addition to the antiquated formulas, is that there's very little transparency in the school funding. So we look at the general state aid. You can find that in the budget, and it's a chunk of money. But it doesn't show within that general state aid what's in there, the foundation level, the poverty grants, the PTEL adjustments. It's all rolled into one number, and it's not broken out. And just as an interesting factoid, the PTEL and poverty adjustments, those two pieces of the state aid formula actually cost more than the Department of Children and Family Services, than the Department of Aging, and yet you can't find them in the budget. By the way, I have a bill introduced on that, so hopefully we can change that. But what I thought was particularly disturbing, and what I think we need to spend a little time on, is what's happened to the invisible shift away from the foundation level. Now remember, we have a foundation level because that's our resource equalizer. The whole theory of funding in Illinois is that those districts that don't have property tax wealth will get more money from the state. So as you can see from this bar graph, in the year 2000, 88% of the school funding went into that foundation level, that resource equalizer. 10% into poverty, 2% into PTEL. Look what's happened between then and 2012. We now have only 53% of the money going into the foundation level. Again, the very formula that is supposed to equalize state funding resources for every child in the state. 34% into the poverty formula and 13% into PTEL. Again, all you see in the budget book is the general state aid in general. You don't see what's happened to the formula over time that I think is frankly very alarming. So I want to talk briefly about what's happened to the elements of those. What in the heck happened that poverty, grew so much and that PTEL has exploded over 1,000% during that time? With poverty, the key thing that happened is that there was a change in the definition of poverty. So in the year 2000, poverty was defined as a child who was at 100% of the FPL or under, the federal poverty level or under. Pretty clear-cut, easy distinction. In 2003, as I understand it in the BIMP bill, which is not really discussed, at length in all what's in it, they changed the definition to allow the Department of Family and Health Care Services to define who is in poverty based on the utilization of programs within that department. That was a huge change because Medicaid, for example, is one of the programs it's based on. As you know, in some of the Medicaid programs, we can go up to 200% of poverty. So it dramatically changed the number of people in poverty, not by their circumstance, but by the definition. So that was a huge change. Now, there's also, I love using this word, curvilinear formula in the curvilinear. Got that? In the poverty, and it makes sense because what they do is they take the number of kids in poverty, the higher the concentration, the more you get. And I frankly think that makes sense. You know, I like to remind people I'm a social worker, and hat tip to School of Social Work from Loyola, my alma mater. It makes sense to realize that it probably costs more to educate when you have a concentration of poverty. But the question is, are we at the right level of that concentration to where today, if you're a child in poverty in the city of Chicago, each student gets an extra $2,500 on top of the foundation level. Whereas if you are in Arlington Heights or Mount Zion or Elmhurst or Edwardsville, you get $355. That's a huge, huge difference. So while I think it's important to recognize that, yes, we need to account for the fact we have many children in poverty and they cost more to educate, I'm not sure that the ratio of 7 or 8 times is the right one to be at. So that is one thing that we do need to re-examine. The other big piece that's exploded is the PTEL piece. That's the property tax limit law. If you recall, when property tax caps went into place, it limited the amount of money that a school district could access. And so even if their base went way up, their EAV went way up, which is a number that figures into what they get from the state, so they might look really rich, they couldn't access that money. And we agreed that created a problem for them. So there was a small adjustment that was given to help districts that had a skyrocketing EAV that they could not earmark it, or they couldn't access it for purposes of their school aid. So that's where it came from. However, over the last 10 years, it's exploded by 1,000%. And part of it, of course, is the fact that the real estate market went way, way up. And actually, now that real estate prices are stabilizing and coming down, it's becoming slightly less of a problem. But again, I think it's something that we need to take a look at because of the distortion it's created within the school aid formula. So at this point, with Chicago having 18% of the state's enrollment, they're getting 49% of the PTEL money. That's a problem. By the same token, you know, to go back to poverty, where Chicago has 31% of the students in poverty, they're getting 47% of the poverty money. So you can see that those two pieces of the formula are dramatically weighted towards the city. The foundation level, which goes out, is only 53%. So just to walk through this chart, I indicated 18% on the far left is Chicago's enrollment. Early childhood funding, they have 37%. That was set by formula. They just got that money off the top. Since the time that amount was set, the population has gone down for Chicago. So I think, again, time to reevaluate. We've talked about PTEL, corporate personal property tax, again, something that's been long in place, but the formula has not been revisited. And even the EFAB Commission said that they were pretty surprised that we hadn't revisited that formula, again, with 18% of the students, 27% of corporate property replacement tax. Talked about poverty grants, special education, which is a huge challenge for all districts around the state. Chicago has 17% of the enrollment of students with special ed, 30% of that funding. Again, I think it's critical that we take a look at how that money is distributed. Again, you add it all up, and we felt pretty confident that the speaker's statement that Chicago is getting a free lunch was really not the fact at all. In fact, if the state paid Chicago's normal teacher pension costs, we'd be paying $115 million. In fact, we pay 11. So you have to sort of give them the advantage of $104 million. But when you add all of this stuff up, they actually are advantaged to the tune of over $600 million. So that's why I say it's very difficult to separate out the cost shift on pensions from a much larger discussion about education funding. And in my view, when we talk about education funding, let's not limit it this time to just the money piece. Now, I see Juan Rangal here, and any of you who have toured the UNO charter schools, you've got to be impressed. I mean, both with the output, the way they build schools, and there's data across the country, not only on charters, but limited school choice, much more data than we had 10, 20 years ago. It's time that we revisit that, because the way we're going to solve the state's problems is not just putting more money and looking for more money, it's how are we going to do things smarter and better. in every area that we have to fund, and I don't think that school funding can be exempt from that. So that is something, it's sort of, we Senate Republicans like to talk about that as our new Medicaid project, and it may take us a while, but I think that we've got the facts, and by the way, these facts have all been checked with the State Board of Ed. They agree that this is the case, and they, in fact, themselves are somewhat concerned about it. So as we go forward today, and you hear me and my colleagues saying, oh, we don't want anything to do with the property tax shift, please keep in mind that it is because we truly believe it's part of a larger discussion that we need to have, and that if we can reform pensions based on the benefit side, which is clearly what we need to do, we are all in on that one, and we will be all in on this as a separate discussion in order to try to move the ball forward. And then hopefully I can come back here next year or the year after and talk about more successes. So with that, I thank you very much for listening, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Right off the bat. Jack Thornton, if you have a question, just raise your hand. Kent Griffith, Wolf Point Strategies. Specifically, what legislation is, take two. Specifically, what legislation is Cullerton's, Kent, why don't you state your question clearly?
I can't help you, but I can't read it with my glasses.
Right.
American Trial Lawyers Association pushing this here for legislation, and why?
What legislation the trial lawyers are pushing?
You covered that, didn't you?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, honestly, nothing leaps to mind. I'm sure they have a few things that are in there, but truly, the thing that everyone's talking about in Springfield right now is pension reform, the budget. There's not a lot, like I said, that comes to mind on things that is high-profile trial lawyer related. Oh, I keep an eye on him.
Christine, realizing there wouldn't be a whole lot of questions from this crowd, for many reasons, I have a couple. 3 steps for pension reform. 3 steps, not 4, 3. 1, everyone who gets a state pension over $25,000 pays a state income tax.
I want me to, okay. You know, Illinois is unique in that we do not tax pensions, and so it sounds like a very fine idea, but here's what we need to think about. Obviously, I don't think we should tax pensions under $25,000, but I'm not sure 25, if that's someone's only income, is the level at which we should start taxing. I don't think anybody has a problem taxing a pension that is $250,000. So where is that line, and where do you actually lose the benefit because of taxing it because you set the income level so high? There just aren't that many people with huge pensions. So if we start taxing people that are living on $35,000 or something like that, sure, we can do that. We're not going to get that much money from it. And quite frankly, anytime you change taxes, you influence people's behavior. And it's one more reason to think about, not only do I like the weather here, but I can go somewhere, another state, Tennessee, and not have my pension tax. So we need to proceed very carefully with that.
The river wards have come in, so I'll stop my question. You saw me, I was changing 25,000 to 50 just so I get caught short on that. Okay, Randy, is that Nornis? Where are you, Randy? From Aon. Fairness. Why should government workers maintain defined... Oh, I shouldn't read this one, should I? I'm in. Fairness. Why should government workers maintain defined benefit pensions while most taxpayers have 401ks?
Well, that's, I mean, pension envy is an issue. And there is, and it's rightfully so, because the people who don't have that are paying the benefit for the defined benefit. Now, there have been a number of proposals that suggest that we should just go to defined contribution. The problem is that it's easier said than done, quite frankly. So setting aside for a moment the fact that there is this constitutional protection, which we do have to deal with. And by the way, I think we're, you know, even with the second-tier system, you know, we're looking at giving people options, combining. So over time, I think we're inching in that direction. But just from the financial piece of it, if we were to go to defined benefit, Probably people that have to be in Social Security who are not already, meaning our teachers. Not sure the federal government is willing to take them on, number one. Secondly, we would have to be making the employer contribution. At the same time, we still have to pay off this enormous unfunded liability that we already owe. And just from a cash flow perspective, it makes it very, very difficult to do. But again, we do have a constitutional issue that we can't ignore.
Okay. Tom Leahy, I think you answered this, but I'll give it to you. Where are you, Tom? Where are
There
you?
he is. He was way in back.
All right. Everyone in the back, you notice, you guys in front, pretty confident, aren't you, that you keep those seats? You don't have any questions. You'll be moving on up. Is there a disparity between the educational spending per student in Chicago and the suburbs? You mean state spending?
Total spending. You know, it gets difficult to compare because not everyone's a unit district. I mean, so it's, and I'm sure it varies. I don't have all those numbers. So there's not one price for Chicago and one price for the suburbs. It goes by district. Chicago's a unit district, so it sort of blends both high school and grade school, so it's probably a little higher than just a grade school district in the suburbs. But we certainly have access to that information if someone wanted to see a comparison, and if you want to contact me, I'd be happy to assist you with getting that.
Okay. Showing tremendous restraint on this issue. Graham Grady, Shesky and Froelich, 10 words or less. What is the biggest impediment to pension reform?
Fear of voter retaliation, I think, quite honestly. I think, and that's on both sides of the aisle. People that are heavily involved with the unions, who honestly spend a lot of money in reelection campaigns, are very hesitant to tick off a key part of their constituency. So I think that is a huge problem.
Okay. Moving along, Esther Corpez, where are you, Esther? All in the back. Okay, Vanguard Health. The Medicaid cost savings did not address the current Medicaid liability. What is the plan to reduce the backlog of old Medicaid bills and that exceed 200-plus days? Good question.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we talked about last year, and we did some to begin to chip away at the liability, not only of Medicaid, but everything, is to set a spending number for the state on a whole that was less than the money that is coming in the door. So spend less than you have coming in and apply the difference to old bills. And I think we need to continue to do that. You know, there's an alternative out there that's discussed sometimes that is, let's just borrow some money and catch everybody up. But honestly, that's what's gotten us into the difficulty we're in, because what that allows us to do is to continue to sustain a very high spending level. So there's no substitute for discipline and forcing yourself to pay down those bills with cash that we have coming in. And remember, we got $7 billion more in the tax increase.
Okay, shifting subject since we solved that one. Okay. Margaret Neely, Field Museum. What are your thoughts about gun control and the proposed restrictions in public places?
I'm actually pretty optimistic about gun control and concealed carry right now. I think that when you look at, what happened obviously in Connecticut and in Colorado, I mean, everyone's going, wow, this isn't right. On the other hand, you look at what's happened in Chicago where guns are illegal, and you read every weekend that 7, 8 people are shot overnight. Heavy restriction isn't working either. So I'm sensing that legislators are to a point where we're being forced to deal with guns because of the court, at least concealed carry, and gun control in general. And I think we've got some really good people working on it. I will tell you in the Senate, we have Kwame Raoul and Tim Bivens, good people, policy-oriented. So I think we'll come up with something that makes sense. My personal viewpoint with respect to limitations on concealed carry is I am for them. I actually listened to the House hearing on the CT, having them on public transit, and was persuaded that it's probably wise to prohibit them when places that serve alcohol, places that have a lot of people and a lot of emotion running high. So I'm open to restrictions.
Watch this. Would one call that pistol envy? Remember, I have tenure. Okay. Peter Skoski, MPC, Metropolitan Planning Commission. Any chance of the gas tax increase for transportation capital?
You know, the gas tax, from purely policy point of view, makes a ton of sense because it's a user fee. The problem we have with it is we pour gas tax money in at the top and we open the spigot at the bottom and it goes out into all kinds of other things. So there's a lack of trust on the part of the taxpayers in this state that the money they actually pay for in the gas tax is going to go to build roads. I mean, they may be assured that a piece of it does, but I think that if we were really able to stop the diversions from the road fund, there's even been some talk about a constitutional amendment creating some sort of lockbox, that then you might be able to persuade people to go down that road. Otherwise, we're stuck with, and we do need to have another capital bill, searching around for revenue we were pretty creative last time, but there's just so many ways you can be creative. And you know, we did the soda pop and video gaming, and, you know, there's really not a lot of nexus between what you're paying for and what you get. That is the beauty of the gas tax, but unless and until people have some confidence that's where it's going, I think it'll be problematic to pass.
I will spare you my source of revenue called a bicycle tax, but when Gabe Klein comes here, be sure you come here for that one because I'll be ready, seriously. All right. You already answered my 3 questions with the first answer. So how about a big round of applause for